Previously, 3 awesome minimum viable products, and 1 that was a little less awesome. Today, pivot or persevere. Oh, and stick around to the end to grab your free Lean Startup cheat sheet. Welcome to Development That Pays. My name is Gary Strawn, and in less than a week, on the same day as this episode goes live, I'll be giving a talk in central London. Yes, the person that hides from you each and every week will soon be stepping out in front of a room full of people. As you can imagine, I want to be well prepared for that, so I'm recording this episode a few days early, which means I don't have the results from our survey to share with you today, but it does give me the opportunity to introduce you to another lean concept, the pivot. In the lean startup world, a pivot is what you do when you go around this loop and discover that your cool idea just didn't work out. Put another way, the experiment you designed to test your cool idea failed. As Thomas Edison might have said, you found one more way not to invent a light bulb. And that's okay. You pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start all over again. You didn't expect me to sing that, did you? You pivot and try something else. Eric Ries, in his book The Lean Startup, has a nice visualization for this. He describes the startup phase as being like a runway. Your first idea leads to your first experiment, which is your first attempt to get airborne. Alas, first attempts, more often than not, fail. So you pivot and try something else. There are 2 ways this story can play out. You continue to experiment and pivot until you make a breakthrough, and then you soar off into the sunset. Alternatively, you continue to experiment and pivot until you crash and burn. You've burned through your funding, and it's game over. Can you see that the more pivots you're able to fit in, the more opportunities you have to make a breakthrough? You start to see why it's important for the minimum viable product to be, well, minimal. It's minimal to be cheap, which helps extend the funding runway, and it's minimal to be fast, which maximises the potential number of pivots you can fit in before, well, bad things happen. The MVP must also be viable from the point of view of the customer. This quote from David J. Bland expresses it really well. The hardest thing about MVP, you decide what's minimum, the customer decides what's viable. And so she does. It must also be viable in another way. It must be viable as an experiment. Why? Because on the outcome of the experiment rests a very important decision. The decision to pivot or persevere. We want our MVP to be viable as a product from the customer's standpoint and viable as an experiment from our standpoint. Remember the Zappos MVP that we looked at a couple of episodes ago? Zappos is the startup that wanted to sell shoes online. Its MVP from the customer's point of view is flawless. She browses for shoes, she buys shoes, she receives shoes in the post. Try saying that 5 times. This type of MVP has a name. It's called a Wizard of Oz MVP. So called because the customer is oblivious of all the shenanigans going on behind the scenes, behind the curtain.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great Oz has spoken.
And because the customer is oblivious, it's a perfect product. And because it's a perfect product, it's also a perfect experiment. But perfection is not always possible. Years ago, when I attended Swindon College, yes, I knew you'd be impressed. I was there for marketing night classes. I learned about moving potential customers through the stages of attention, interest, desire, and action. That's AIDA, if you're into your acronyms. The Zappos MVP exercises all 4 of the AIDA stages, all the way from A to A. The other MVPs we looked at, Dropbox, Buffer, and our very own Mundane MVP, do not. They run out of steam somewhere between desire and action. This is unfortunate because, after all, it's action that pays the bills. But it would be wrong to judge these MVPs too harshly. Not all products lend themselves to a Wizard of Oz MVP. Take Dropbox. Dropbox is an app that synchronizes files across your devices. It's an application that installs on your PC, your Mac, your laptop, everything. And it has to just work. I don't know about you, but I can't think of any way of faking that. Perhaps AIDA can help. There's a definite sequence to AIDA. You don't get interest without attention. You don't get desire until you get interest. And you don't get action without desire. In a perfect world, I want an MVP that tests all 4 stages. But I'll settle for an MVP that covers the first 3 only. If that feels unsatisfactory, just remember that the, in quotes, traditional way of testing out new product ideas is to conduct a, you guessed it, a survey. If I run a survey, how many steps does that cover? What do you reckon? I could get an indication of interest. I could get an indication of desire. Hell, I could even get an indication of action. But the problem with indicators is that they can be dead wrong. The other MVP that we looked at, Buffer, delivered a direct measurement of interest and a direct measurement of desire. Desire may not be a sufficient condition, it doesn't guarantee action, but it is a necessary condition. So I prefer not to settle for an indication of desire. I want a direct measurement of it. That's what I expect from an MVP. Coming right back down to earth for a second, or tarmac, or concrete, or whatever it is that runways are made of. When the experiment is over, when we have our measurement of desire, will we have the data to make the all-important decision, the decision to pivot or persevere? Unfortunately for us, it's not desire but action that pays the bills. So we are going to have to, and it pains me to say it, apply a fudge factor. If we're lucky, applying the factor will not need a calculator. The one thing we don't want is a middling result. We want either a total flop or a resounding success. That will make it absolutely clear whether we're supposed to pivot or persevere. A quick reminder before we finish that I have a cheat sheet for you, none other than the Lean Startup cheat sheet. You'll find a link to it in the description below. Click the link, follow the instructions, and it's all yours. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, it would be amazing if you'd click to like, share it far and wide, and hit the logo right here to subscribe for a new episode every Wednesday. I look forward to seeing you next time. Cheers for now.